welcome to the Eye for Games podcast. This is episode 2. I'm your usual host, Jerry Kline. Joining me tonight are my co-hosts. First off, let's say hello to Nick.
Hello.
And also joining us as well is Evan.
Hey guys.
And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the state of the industry in 2014, where we think it will end up in 2015, and we'll conclude with talking about our personal goals for the year. So let's start off, since 2014 was really only a few weeks ago. Guys, overall, how do you feel like 2014 was for the games industry? Just looking at it very broadly, thumbs up, thumbs down, good year, bad year?
I think that this year was a pretty impressive year as far as the business side of video games. It was pretty crazy just how much money Destiny rolled in this year, despite sort of mixed reviews. So I think that, at least from an economic standpoint, the industry seems like it's still pretty strong. So, as far as the independent scene, I unfortunately didn't really. I mean, the mobile independent seems to be growing, and that's pretty cool to see. Games are sort of taking off, and you taking these really small budgets and turning them into kind of mega blockbusters. So that's been pretty cool to see.
Okay, well, Nick, what about you overall? Do you feel like 2014 was a good year, a bad year, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to pretty much agree with him on that. I've noticed a little bit of suffering in the console area. Doesn't seem like they're doing as well as they should. Though Destiny kind of brought them out of the hole that they were slowly falling into. But other than consoles, yeah, it seems like everything's been doing pretty well.
Yeah, I thought it was actually, and I wrote about this actually previously when we did our end of the year wrap up. I believe it was for the magazine, but to me, 2014 felt a lot like it was the year of 2015. There was always some good games that came out, but really a lot of the big stuff, the big AAA stuff like The Order and Evolve, it actually got pushed back to 2015. So it seemed like there was a lot of that. Like by about June, by about E3 of 2014, it seemed like pretty much every major release that was going to come out this year had been pushed back to 2015. I mean, there were some exceptions, like, you know, The Evil Within, of course, came out this year and things like that. But what are your guys' thoughts on that? Is it just me, or did 2014 seem like a year where there were just a lot of delays and just things being pushed back?
Yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, Evolve got pushed back quite a lot. Battlefield, Rainbow Six doesn't. I think they've like completely renamed it and pushed that so far back that it's got a new name. Yeah, I mean, I was expecting another 10, 15 games to already be out by now, and they're not even close to coming out.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. 2014 has kind of seemed like a primer for 2015 because you've got things like Arkham Knight is right around the corner. The next part of the new Tomb Raider series is right around the corner as well. Mortal Kombat's going to be one of the first next gen fighters to hit and take full advantage of all that horsepower. So, I mean, it's been kind of strange. Like, this year had a lot of cool titles, but for some reason it just seemed like all the things that people have been waiting for a long time are just pushed that one more year past, you know?
Yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on some of the big releases that did come out this year? Because we did get some stuff. We got, of course, Assassin's Creed. We got not one but two games this year. One of which, of course, was Assassin's Creed Unity, which people were talking about, but probably not for the right reasons. And another game that people were talking about, also probably not for the right reasons, was the Master Chief Collection. So, just thinking about how even the games we got this year, it seemed like were extremely sort of buggy. Did you personally have any experience with either one of those titles?
Haven't had much time to actually play either of those. I jumped onto the Master Chief. Like they have all the menu screens, and I got to kind of go through it a little bit. And like I was looking at all the app system, I was surprised to find out that the TV series you have to pay for, like when they advertised it, they talked about getting that for free when you play on Xbox One and being exclusive, or I guess it was kind of hinted at but not really said that way. So that was a surprise to me. And then I played a little bit of the multiplayer, and I didn't run into any specific issues. But like I said, I didn't get to play much of it. I just haven't had the time.
Well, just in general, what do you think your guys like? What are your guys' thoughts on the state of those releases? Because we saw some games that come out that were, I mean, day one patches and stuff like that are really nothing new, unfortunately. But you saw stuff that came out like the Crew and Unity, and the Master Chief Collection, where large portions of the games were inaccessible, such as the multiplayer, or you saw a lot of stuff with just Unity, a lot of the bugs and glitches associated with that. And then I think it was, what else? I want to say NBA 2K15, I believe, also came out this year. It had some weird glitches in terms of like the facial recognition software. So, I mean, maybe it's just me, but it seemed like the bugginess and the sort of unfinished nature of a lot of these games really kind of shown this year. So it seemed like pretty much every time you heard somebody talk about a major release, it wasn't necessarily always a good thing.
Yeah, I feel like they've gotten to a point where they're like right at the deadline of where certain things need to be finished, and they're like, don't worry about it, we'll just fix it after the game comes out. Where that was never a thing. Like when you released a game on the NES, you released a game on an NES, there was no patching. Though obviously things have changed over the years and it's a lot harder to make games, so I get that, but there needs to be some sense of accomplishment and deadline to finish something. When you're going the extra mile and adding some extra features or adding some DLC that's going to come out in day one, that's a different story. But the game that you sell to someone needs to be finished in a final product. None of this half-assed, we'll fix it later on work. And I just don't see these high-end studios caring anymore. They just, whatever they can do to get it out quick, fast money, you know, Halo's going to make money either way. Who cares if there's glitches? Because we'll fix them anyway and people will be content and they're not going to complain. And when they do complain, we're not going to listen, so who cares? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
One game I was impressed with, and you didn't mention it, was Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. Not a fan of the multiplayer, but they kind of stepped their game up on their campaign. Really, really good job at it. And I didn't notice any glitches in both their multiplayer or campaign, where there's a lot of issues with the previous Call of Duties here and there, balancing issues and just overall lots of issues. I may be missing some in Advanced Warfare. Maybe there's a shit ton and I just completely missed them. But it seems like they kind of stepped their game up on that one, and they released a quality product day one. But yeah, just in general though, like all the studios, like Titanfall. I mean, that was ridiculous. They just released an unfinished product. I don't care what they say. They wanted to make it a multiplayer game. They had full capacity to make a campaign. They had full ability to really add some nice customization and some really great features. And now they've added all these extra bells and whistles 6 months after the game's out. It's just like they just don't care anymore. They know what they can get away with. And why release something day one when they can just release it later on and people still play it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because Halo, historically speaking, I mean, Halo servers have always pretty much been rock steady at launch. Like, Halo is one of those games, whether it's Bungie or 343, you really don't hear about it having a lot of like major bugs and server issues to the point where people can't play online.
Yeah.
So to me, that was actually one of the biggest surprises, that out of all the games that were broken this year was the Master Chief Collection. And
Yeah.
On top of that, I mean, they're not technically new Halo games. I
Right.
mean, I know obviously a lot of work goes into that collection, but you are just releasing a compilation. So, and historically speaking, it's a series that has been pretty solid overall in terms of actually having the servers up and running and things like that on day one.
Right.
So I actually thought that was a really big surprise that it was released in the state that it
Yeah,
was.
I'd
Yeah,
have
I think that sorry, I'm
You're
just
good.
gonna say I think that that kind of speaks to the industry's notion of sort of pushing things out just to make money, and like you were saying, the product at the end is not as important as just how much money can we make in as short amount of time as possible. Titanfall is a really good example of that for me, because I was really excited when I started seeing stuff for it, and then what in my mind happened was the hype train for that game was so big that they just said, you know what, let's make it in a year, finish the multiplayer as best we can, and just ride out all this excitement. And when
Yeah.
they did that, they made a ton of money, but they just completely didn't, put 5% of that effort into a campaign mode. They basically took the multiplayer with bots and added dialogue. It was
That you
completely
that you
ridiculous.
can never hear anyway because you're like, wait, there's
Right, the
dialogue
game
going
is so
on.
loud.
You're just talking
Right.
too much shit to the person you talked to the second ago, and you're
hmm
like, oh wait, there's campaign. Someone's dying in the game. What?
Yeah, the story's going on. Yeah, and then I mean, Unity is also kind of a good example of kind of being on that. We need to push a game out every year, or else we don't make enough money to make the next game. So I don't know. It's a very volatile sort of development cycle.
I also feel that falls into the line of, it feels like a lot of the artists are accepting less pay, and it's lowering the amount of money that is needed to make a game, right? So it's like, well, if we don't need this much, we can release it faster. And in the end, it still takes the same amount of time to release that game, you know? And they feel like, okay, if we can pay people less, we can get this game out faster, and who cares that they need to be faster for less money. And that's
Right,
not gonna work.
right. And I mean, I think that's becoming kind of true for a lot of people, and it's because the industry is so desirable to work in. The visual effects industry for film has the same problem where artists are being paid less and less and expected to work more and more hours and meet tighter deadlines because, the people with the money are going to squeeze as hard as possible on everybody else in order to make as much profit with the lowest cost in the shortest amount of time. So I think that's really kind of a culmination of things.
Yeah, so let's talk. Let's just look at Assassin's Creed for a minute because they did release Unity, but they also released I think it was Rogue. So they released basically a current or a new gen and also a last gen version of the game. Were you guys surprised that they released like basically two major entries in a series? And how do you think that went? Do you think that's a good idea or not?
I think from a kind of a business standpoint, it makes sense because even though the next generation has hit, it still hasn't taken over completely. And from what it would seem, and from the reviews that you can read about Assassin's Creed Rogue, the game seems like it's been in development quite a while. And by the time the new console comes out, the game might have been 80% done. And they just said, well, what do we do? Do we just stop, or do we just release it anyway and kind of shift around some of the resources to finish it slower or whatever. So I'd argue that it's a really good idea because Nintendo has proven that they can sell stuff for old consoles for years and years and years apparently without any repercussions. So I think that it makes sense.
So, Nick, I want to go back to you for a minute because you mentioned really enjoying Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. It seemed like to me, at least my general consensus, it felt like this year was that people were a little less down on Call of Duty in general, and people really seemed to like Advanced Warfare. So, I mean, just based on what you've played, what actually impressed you about the game?
Um, well, one of the cool things was is they like I said, the multiplayer is, in my opinion, terrible, but design-wise, good. And campaign was phenomenal compared to their previous campaigns. They took a lot more time to develop the story. They threw Kevin Spacey in it, which was pretty cool, and they really went for those next gen graphics. I mean, there was times while you're watching shots with Kevin Spacey or any of the main characters, and you're like, if you paused it for a second, it looks like a photograph. Like there's time, especially because you have a real character to kind of play with, and like there's this one scene where three guys and Spacey walks in, and they're all in this room, and these shades open up, and the light hits them, the sunlight, and it literally looks like they're real for a couple. Like if you could pause it here and there, they're still not hitting the realism full all the way through, but they're really close. I mean, I see movies being animated soon. like with live actors, they're just gonna be CG. But um, but for the actual gameplay, it's interesting. They try to do something different, and I guess you have to give them that because it's not just another Call of Duty. It's Halo meets Call of Duty, I guess, or Titanfall, the Titanfall version. But the the mechanics at which you're jumping in the air and all that, they're just somewhat clunky. And you played Titanfall previously, so you're like, you've got these smooth, really well designed mechanics for wall walking and jumping and all that. And then you go to Call of Duty and you're like, if I wanted that, I would play Titanfall, right? Um, but besides that, they added some really well-designed customization. You know, you can customize your whole character now, kind of like Rainbow Six style, but a little less. As like Rainbow Six had a little bit more customization than Call of Duty did, but and then they also added some really interesting features with just guns and stuff, just like normal. But with this new advanced warfare, they have some really cool things like the threat grenade was pretty cool, where you can throw a grenade and it'll actually light up the environment and show you where people are, kind of like a visual UAV map, which was pretty cool, especially in the campaign. Like the campaign lets you do all this stuff a little bit more frequent, where if you're using stuff like that in multiplayer, you're probably bad because you're wasting your time. But in campaign, you can enjoy those really cool bells and whistles of the game, and they really did go out and add a lot of new features. So I think it all around is a solid Call of Duty game, but I'm hoping that the next Call of Duty game is in Advanced Warfare 2, and they try to stick with this futuristic stuff. Like, they need to get back, like, it'd be cool if they went and did, like, a World at War 2 and went back to the older guns, but I don't know if that's the right business choice, you know? But yeah, overall, good game.
Mhm. Cool. So yeah, continuing sort of with that line of discussion, that line of thought, what were some of your guys' favorite games in 2014? And were there any disappointments? Were there any games that came out that you were looking forward to, but ultimately they ended up disappointing you?
It's a good
Um,
question.
Yeah. I mean, Destiny was really cool, but I felt like they just straight up lied to us about the game. There was scenes where they're like, there's a point where they show the character in game. This was when they were showing gameplay footage, and they're like, "See all that? You can explore it." It's one of the biggest memes of Destiny right now because everything that they showed you can explore, you can't. It's at the edge of a cliff, and you can't go over there at all. So they like the open worldness that they promised didn't happen. So it's still a solid game, um, but I just was disappointed because I was expecting something different, I guess. And I kind of got bored after a while. Once you hit the raids, it just wasn't fun anymore. The raids weren't very hard. If you've ever done any sort of raiding in like a MMO, like WildStar or World of Warcraft or Terra, you know, you maybe not Terra, but you see some really complex mechanics where this game it was like just kind of stand still and shoot stuff. And then the frustrating part was you had this division of people who know how to raid and people who don't know how to raid, and then it divided a lot of people. You have the basic shooter people that are like Call of Duty, and they're just good at running around and shoot stuff because they just enjoy the running around and chilling and just having fun with the game. They're not as methodical of a player and don't want to sit down and have to think. And it kind of brought the game of those type of gamers to the edge and gave them something to do, which was interesting. But it wasn't complex enough. So the raiders got bored because it was too easy, and the non-raiders got confused and frustrated because it was too hard, and those people started getting pissed off at each other. So it kind of really got this big division wall of good people and bad people, and the good people just got bored with the game, and the bad people got bored with the game because the good people told them they were bad at the game. So that's a big thing that I think they did wrong. They needed to pick a side. They needed to make maybe an easy mode, right? That was walk through and enjoy it with really no mechanics, and then the hard mode for people that are really good at mechanics and want something complex. But in this type of game, I think adding complexity to that
Right.
isn't going to make them money, right? So you look at something like WildStar, which we talked about previously. WildStar is a phenomenal game. They have a lot of issues, but in the general basis, it's phenomenal. But the marketing team behind that are complete idiots because they marketed it for hardcore players. Well, welcome to 1% of the population. You're not going to make any money. And if Destiny was to have done that, and they kind of did in some points, and then they slowly nerfed it and people figured out easy ways to cheese the bosses and stuff, then they wouldn't have done as well as they did if they did that with the whole game. So the game is generally casual, and rating kind of stopped a lot of people. So I think they needed to just either tone back rating or have different modes where there's a toned back easy version and then a really really hard version for those few people that want something hard. But I don't know. It's a shooter. You're not going to find something that complex, especially on a console where the people you're aiming for are not going to be as hardcore, for mechanics, anyways. Where like WildStar, you can see how it's unsuccessful because of that. Like they pushed for the hardcore people, and there just wasn't enough of them for the game to be successful.
Yeah, I think the only game that kind of let me down was Titanfall, because, and granted, I bought it on sale from Origin when it was really really cheap. It's such a solid. There's so many solid mechanics in the game, and it feels so good when things all kind of work. But then you play it for, I mean, I played it for maybe a week, and then I was kind of over it, and it was because there's nothing that seems to kind of give you any longevity with it, and it doesn't feel that competitive because it's so hyperactive that it's so easy to die just because you're, playing the game in the pace that it expects you to play
Yeah.
it. And it doesn't really reward you for staying alive, so it just kind of feels too arcadey to me. And for people that are, hardcore Call of Duty people, when they get good, they don't die very much, They end up a round with 20 to 3 deaths, and I am a very competent shooter, and I played Titanfall, and I ended up, at the end of the week, I was maybe breaking even or doing, 10% more than my deaths, and that was good. And I don't know, it just didn't really feel that great. The other thing that I was kind of disappointed with was, I've been kind of getting into fighting games, and the Ultra Street Fighter 4 release for Steam was actually, I was really excited for it, and it looks really good on the PC. And then you find out that the netcode for the game is abysmal and pretty much unplayable about, I don't know, maybe 70% of the time. And so I basically bought a game that has about, 30% of the content. For most people in a game, when they're, especially a fighting game, it's all about, that online competitive nature of it. So that was kind of a big letdown for me.
Oh, Sunset Overdrive. That game is amazing. Okay, so when I saw the commercials for it, I thought it was going to be a little bit different. I was very disappointed that it wasn't 4-player co-op. Like they have these co-op maps, basically Mass Effect style, which I hated. Like I mean, it was cool to do that, but I was expecting an open world co-op campaign, which would have been way better. But overall, it was Tony Hawk meets Dead Rising, and it was really fun. There's a lot of cheesy storyline bits where you're like, okay, this is really bad, but I think that was on purpose. The type of style that they went for was supposed to be this very comical, over the top, saturated game, and just it's really fun to play when you want to play something different. Everything that's been coming out is a very dark. You got Titanfall, blow shit up, Rise, cut people in half. Halo, throw a plasma grenade to someone's face, Dead Rising, chop a zombie in half. But even though Sunset Overdrive is about killing zombies and stuff, it's like they're made at they drink these energy drinks and they turn into these infected, and it's just they give you all kinds of fun weapons like helicopter guns, and if you get to play that game, it's so worth playing. I guess it's an Xbox One exclusive, so I don't know if you guys have gotten to play it, but one of the best games of the year in my opinion for originality. They did a lot of really cool stuff with the game.
Yeah. I think a game that really surprised me was Shadows of Mordor, because I had heard almost nothing about it until probably a few weeks before it came out. Didn't pick it up for a long time. Finally picked it up somewhere around Christmas, and I can definitely see why people were putting it on their list for Game of the Year. It's unbelievably detailed. It has so many things to do. The roguelike design for the open world missions and the captains and everything else that's going on in that game is completely top notch. It just completely
That's
blew
one
my
I need
mind.
to get.
I was just completely on my back. I had no idea it was that kind of game. And I played it for hours and hours and hours, and then I can't stop playing it. Like, I need to get everything done. I want the 100% on my completion on my save file, you know? Also, a really good example of the share button on the PlayStation 4 being something that I wanted to use, because it's the first game I've ever seen that used a photo mode that I thought actually made sense.
How so?
Really, really cool feature. Well, it's the first time I've personally played a game where the pause lets me move around and change depth of field and all these, real-time effects that are happening in the game, and then position my camera exactly where I want it, and then I can press my share button, and that's the shot that I get to save, and I can share it out. And coupled with the animations being so fluid and everything looks correct when you're doing, some of the executions and stuff like that, it's just really gratifying to be able to capture moments in the game that detailed, that are, that you get to have all that control over. And then you can share that with people and you check it out, like, I did this and I was on top of this giant grog and I jumped off and I killed that guy, and yeah, it was just really impressive.
So, any other games that we think were worth mentioning in 2014?
Can we do mobile games?
Yeah, sure. if you have a mobile game that stood out to you for better or for worse.
Monument Valley was amazing. It was a super cool little game that came out. It's an isometric puzzle game that has a really cool art style, and I don't know. It just kind of came out of nowhere and it's kind of blown people out of the water,
Yeah, I heard about that. I felt like mobile wasn't necessarily as strong this year as it was in the past. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but people were definitely talking about Monument Valley. That was like the one mobile game that seemed like that had really hooked people. That and like Hearthstone, but
Yeah, I was really
Yeah.
glad to see Hearthstone made it to the Android without much problem, so that was cool.
Yeah, I was, and is it on the? It's on the iPhone too now, right?
Believe it's on iOS. I don't know if it's made it to the actual phone screens yet.
Yeah.
I think it's just available for tablets.
yeah, I think it is just for tablets.
Is this
so I guess with the interface. And
is this
stuff.
Monument Valley where you line up the stairs so that the people can walk through? Because there's another game that was on the PSP like this, I think. Like you have to turn the screen so that certain things line up. Is that how it works?
I mean, it's a similar-ish kind of puzzle
Mhm.
design. It's very much like MC Escher inspired, sort of playing with perspective constantly
Yeah.
to create paths to let your player continue along their path.
Yeah, that's cool.
But I think what really grabs people is the isometric, MC Escher style drawings and all the really cool colors and a really interesting
Yeah.
art style choice, along with intuitive and meaningful puzzles, I guess. So I thought it was really cool.
Okay, cool. So yeah, 2015. Obviously, we're only a few weeks in at this point, but I want to talk to you guys and sort of get your impression. Now, I know this is kind of hard to predict, but based on some of the stuff we've seen lately, some of the trends that we've seen in 2014, and I know we talked about some games that were pushed back this year, but what are some things that you think will happen in 2015? Where do you see the industry going over the next few months?
I mean, sort of like the early season of 2015, I don't see much going on because, it's not really the best time to sell games for the most part. It's usually right before summer, right before Christmas, or your two big sort of release windows for most companies. I mean, I'm really excited because it's finally getting to that stage of the game where the consoles have all been out long enough that we're not sort of waiting for the breadcrumbs of the launch titles. We're in anticipation of huge libraries coming out over the span of the whole year because they've had all this time with the kits. I'm really excited to see where they go with like the Uncharted series. Some of the not necessarily smaller projects, but lesser known, like No Man's Sky is going to be pretty impressive from what I've seen.
Yeah, that looks interesting.
I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff that's kind of coming around the corner that has either been a very long time in the works or has just sort of sprung out of nowhere because it's like, oh, here's the new console, and we're gonna buy a dev kit for it for this console because we didn't finish last console, whatever the reasoning happened to be. So there are a lot of reboots that are kind of getting their next sequels. Witcher is getting its third iteration. Battlefront might actually come out finally for Star Wars,
Yeah.
which would be pretty cool.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of those nostalgia games that was better in the past than it is
Oh yeah.
nowadays. You know, the old Battlefront games are they're pretty janky. Like they really are not the best games in the world, but the idea is so cool that it's hard not to remember it as being something amazing.
Yeah, it'd be cool to
As far as the
see. It'd be
independence,
cool to see them do
as far
that
as
with
the
Battlefield, like Battlefield style Battlefront, that big of a map with.
well, that's what I mean. I think that's what they were going for
Yeah,
before Lucas got canned.
yeah,
They sort of closed all that studio. So, I mean, I just hope that what got picked up by EA and DICE is what they had originally envisioned to just make Battlefield as Star
yeah,
Wars, which is, could be amazing.
yeah. Hopefully.
The- as far as the independence, the guys that made Limbo are finally releasing something new. It's called Inside. That's all I know about it. I've seen a trailer. It looks interesting, so it'd be kind of cool to see what a really successful independent studio has been up to all this time.
On whatchamacallit, the people that made Bastion, they released another game. I can't remember the name of it. Something with a T. Yeah, that
Transistor.
looks good yet, but that one just came out. I'm
Mhm.
surprised. I was happy to see them make
Yeah,
another game.
Transistor is very
Yeah,
recent.
I was happy to see them make another game because
Oh, yeah.
Bastion was so great.
Yeah, I think that 2015 is just kind of the strong arm of the current gen, sort of surpassing the last gen and cementing its place in my opinion, because the last year was kind of this trickle of half titles or remakes and stuff like that, and now we're going to get all these new IPs, like The Order is coming out and all these really cool titles that have nothing to do with other series.
Yeah,
and
there's
stuff
Evolve
like that,
as well. That looks. I got to play the beta. I feel like it's gonna be one of those games that kind of gets boring after a while because it's really interesting the way they went 4 people versus one, and it's fun. And I think it'd be even better if you were like doing a LAN party and you had 4 people sitting next to you while you were doing it. But
Sure.
to queue up against random people, unless you've got like 4 other friends, which like on in party chat or whatever, which is where I could see it being great. But like from what I've seen, it just doesn't look like that game's gonna
Hmm.
be successful. I think they'll make a shit ton of money on it because it's original and new, but the longevity of it feels lasted. Like, I mean,
Right.
okay, how many times can I bash people into the wall?
Yeah.
It'd be interesting if they brought out like a really, really cool mode where it was like 5 beasts versus like 20 people or something, crazy like
Yeah.
that.
It kind of reminds
And
me in some ways of Natural Selection, because that was a really popular Half-Life mod that kind of had the same idea of like the humans versus aliens. It's a bit of it's a
yeah,
different design. And there's also a mod out there for, I think it's for the Source engine, and I can't remember what it was called, but it had the same kind of idea of like a bunch of people against one really powerful player. And it was like a horror game. The person was invisible like 90% of the time or some weird rule like that. And it was really fun, and but it didn't, like you said, it doesn't have that longevity. Like how long is that going to be enjoyable? So,
yeah, and it doesn't seem like there's any campaign. Like they kind of pulled a Titanfall. I feel like that game would be really cool. And I may be wrong. Maybe there is a campaign, but from what I've seen into it, I've only dabbled in looking into the game. Um, but from what I've seen, there's no campaign. So you're like, who are these 4 characters? Why are they? From what I saw in the beta, there's 4 characters, and they come to this planet to kill these creatures that are messing up the colony. And it's like, okay, cool. Why don't you make a campaign? Make it 4 player co-op, have some really intricate bosses, and make this whole 1 versus 4 just a game mode. And making it the focus is odd. Another thing which would have been cool is kind of playing the other side, where there's the 2 campaign kind of thing. Like, what was the game that did that? Was it Gears of War, right? Where you could play both sides, and that would have been cool for this game. You know. Um,
there's a lot of cool stuff.
Okay. Yeah, aside from like actual game releases, do you think there's going to be any major changes or upheavals in the industry? Maybe any like studio consolidations, or do you think there'll be maybe any games that are going to come out and maybe flop this year, or any I don't know, controversies or anything like that could pop up? I know that some of that stuff's kind of hard to predict, especially this early in the year, but it'd be interesting to hear what your guys' thoughts are.
I mean, I hope that some of the controversies just go away at this point. I mean, some of them they went pretty out of control last year with some stuff, and I don't know. where I don't really want to delve into that world because it's all pretty silly and not really worth much of a discussion in a lot of ways. As far as just people fighting for a cause for the wrong reasons, and it's kind of messed up. So that kind of thing. I'm not gonna get into it. I mean, as far as this year, I think that after GDC, there'll be kind of a little bit more to talk about as far as new thoughts and sort of movements in the industry. And I think that as a whole, the industry is always trying to find ways to make things cheaper and faster. And so there might be some consolidation in studios where they take some of their bigger houses and make them a little bit smaller and lay off 20% of their staff from each, that kind of thing, because that's just sort of the nature of it right now, is that the technology is getting better. You need less artists, you need, less programmers for a lot of projects. So there's still studios that are, worrying about closing, or they release a game that doesn't do quite as well as they think, and so they can't fund their next project. So it's always going to be that kind of volatile place to work, though. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Nick, what about you? Do you think there'll be any major controversies that will come out in 2015 surrounding the industry, or do you think maybe there'll be any major consolidations or upheavals or anything like that? What are some of the industry trends that you expect to see this year?
Yeah, I mean, like Evan said, the industry is slowly, just more people can do one job, more things can be done automated, and it's getting to a point where they have enough people to pay people less, so the job is going to come to a point where the really good people are everyone, and the jobs are going to be less money, and people are going to end up leaving those jobs to go take different jobs, and I feel like the industry is just getting saturated that way, and I can definitely see um, either studios eventually, like when I say studios, I mean studios that do work for clients, not like a company that makes games for themselves as a company, but like more of the outsourced studios. I can see them slowly merging together because they can't get enough work to survive on their own. You look at something like what was the studio that made Life of Pi? What was their name?
Rhythm and Hues.
Rhythm and Hues. Like that blows me away that even was able to happen for them to go bankrupt. And
Right.
and it's funny, there was a chart that someone had sent me, because I've got a bunch of friends who work in the industry on Facebook, and they'll send me like, "Oh, look at what happened today." And they sent me a chart, and like in the past 10 years they showed like the decline or the increase of studios shutting down, and how like 10 studios in 2 months closed down here, and 15 studios in 3 months closed down here. And it's ridiculous. I mean, something's got to change, or eventually there's just going to be a point at which there's a couple studios out there, and there's going to be less creative media coming out, whether it's video games or movies, because there just won't be enough people in those studios to get stuff done. I mean, I don't know.
Do you actually see something like that happening with the games
I mean,
industry though, or do you think studios will just become smaller?
well, I don't think they'll become
Like people will leave to
I
become
don't think that'll
independent?
happen. I just think that there's it's just an overall saturation of the market in general, like meaning that the games
Mm-hmm.
are the same over and over again, kind of going back to what we are saying a while ago about, the same games coming out. People don't want to take risk. That combined with this overpopulation of people that are willing to take lower jobs, or outsourcing to other countries, or even outsourcing within the states, or Canada, because Canada's where a lot of the visual effects industry is as well, in Vancouver. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's gonna, I think those kind of meld together, and though they don't normally, like when you bring up both those topics, those really wouldn't fall in the same line, but I think both of those being put together in the same topic could lead to some serious issues in the industry. And same with film, I don't want to hate on actors, but you look at actors and they're getting paid way more than what they should be. Yes, there's some really solid actors out there, but there's also some really bad actors out there that get paid way too much. And that money is going to actors instead of the people that are making the film pretty. You see those memes where you see Iron Man in a green screen and like, look at what your movie looks like without us, you know. And Robert Downey Jr. is a phenomenal actor, but does he really need to get paid whatever he gets paid, 20, 50, $100 million, you know? And half of that is what probably pays all the visual effects for the film, you know, or not all of the visual effects, you know, that's over exaggerating, but you know what I mean, you know, that pays a good chunk of the artists for you know, a good amount of the film. And if they could somehow figure something out there for visual effects, and same thing falls into media, into game development. I mean, you know, you look at the people who are the creative director or CEO, and what are they really doing to get paid this much? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't make money if it's their idea or if they are doing a big chunk of what the people come, like the idea and stuff, but there just needs to be some sort of credibility, or not credibility, that's the wrong word, but some sort of credit to the people that are working on this, the people that are making it what it is, and not just looking at them as worker bees. Because a worker bee is someone who, you know, they're sitting in a warehouse manufacturing, you know, toys or something, and that's a lot less of a skill requirement than the media industry. But it's not, it's getting to the point where it's not, and they just have enough people to where they can just slowly bring that amount of money that they should be making to where it's almost in line with a warehouse worker. I mean, you know, I actually have a buddy who works in warehousing, and he makes, you know, 50, $60,000 a year, and you know, I think he's like an assistant manager there. How is he making more than what some visual effects people who went to school for 8 years, where he didn't go to school at all, how are they making less money than him? And that's an issue. Not to say he doesn't deserve to make the amount of money he's making, because he probably does a great job, but you know, they just, they don't care anymore, and the overall industry is going, something's going to happen. I don't know when, I don't know if it'll happen, but I mean, in my opinion, I think something needs to happen at least. And
That's interesting that you bring that up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, that was about it, but yeah.
Okay, it just made me think. I know, um, this is something that I feel like people have kind of talked about and then later sort of brushed off. But what about unions and unionizing? Do you think we could maybe see the beginnings of like a union movement within the game
The
industry
main
soon?
issue with that is everything's kind of set in stone. People don't like change, you know? And you look at all these other people and all these other jobs, they have unions already, right? Well, for some reason, visual effects fell into the same category as, you know, like a architect. You know, when an architect builds, when they want a job, they bid on it, right? So let's say you go to a client and they want a mall built, right? And it's a $10 million mall, and they're like, here's the blueprints for the mall, and they have you start building, and then you're like 80% through, and we're like, well, we know we wanted a square mall, but we've changed our mind and we want a diamond shaped mall instead. They don't say, well, we said $10 million, so tear it all down, and for the same money we already handed you, you have to start over and build a diamond shaped mall. It doesn't work like that. They say, okay, well, you made the mistake, so come and give us another, you know, $10 million, or we've got 2 million, so give us another $8 million, and we'll make you a new mall, or whatever it is, right? Um, but they don't. And then when you look at the visual effects industry, it's the same exact way. They hand you a blueprint or a script or a concept for what the film is or the game is, and like, this is what we want done. And uh and then they're halfway through and they're like, you know, these trees are, they're not the right color, and we actually wanted these type of trees, and they just created a whole forest for Lord of the Rings. It's like, well, if you want a new forest, we need more money. And they're like, you already bid on it. You said $10 million. That's all you're getting. For some reason, the visual effects industry, they don't get that comeback of, well, we need more money. You know, a lot of times they do, but there's this sense of bidding where you don't, and it's a big issue. And I don't know how and why it's gone this far, but somehow, if a union or whatever whatever it has to be done to be changed, to change it, it does need to get changed, because that's a big issue.
Hmm. I mean, I think that for the visual effects industry, part of that kind of stems from, I guess, the big three, which, you know, are these. There's only three or four major film companies that own almost everything in Hollywood as far as film production.
Hmm.
And so what tends to happen, and this is pure, you know, hearsay, but what can happen to some studios is when the little visual effects houses kind of push back and say, no, we need more money, that studio just says, okay, we'll give you this much money, but you're never getting work from us again.
Exactly.
And then they blacklist them for the other 3 or 4 other large, groups that own all these companies, and they just, they're not going to get in work anymore because no one wants to work with them because they fight.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't think that video games fall into kind of the same category because the work isn't as disjointed from the money in that way, because like Ubisoft is Ubisoft, right? Like they make Assassin's Creed. They have their different studios that make different games, but they aren't like a huge disconnect like Paramount and Corridor Digital, which are 2 ends of the spectrum away from each other.
Yeah.
I think that the comparison's kind of there, but it's not really the same idea because it's not as in-house.
Yeah.
Because the negotiations aren't with yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that one thing that is still kind of happening is the teams in the AAA are getting a little bit smaller. They aren't necessarily cutting in half in a lot of places, but they are getting a little bit more, I guess, sort of streamlined because tools are getting better, computers are getting better, all that sort of stuff. But what is also happening is the amount of people you need to make your own game as an independent has shrunk considerably down to 1 person nowadays. Papers, Please, a mountain of awards, and 1 guy made it. It's just kind of shows that you can put together pretty amazing stuff in a short time nowadays because there's so many tools and free art, and there's just so many things that are available for the creators nowadays. And I think that the independent scene in that regard is kind of filling those gaps where a 20-person studio might not be EA, it might not be Blizzard, but you have a few hundred 30-40 person studios that are just sort of scattered across, but between here at the States and Europe, there's just all these little studios that are popping up all over the place. There's definitely kind of a shift from the AAA was the only way to do it, and now independent games have realized that, especially because of digital distribution and no reliance on retailer, you don't have to work at those kind of places. You can make games yourself.
Yep.
So, any other final thoughts on or expectations of what you guys expect 2015 will have in store for us?
At least from my end, we're finally getting some next-gen fighting games, which is awesome. Big fighting game advocate, obviously, so looking forward to those.
I hope to see Gears of War. I don't know if that's going to make it this year, though, but they've got the new one in development. That'll be interesting.
Well, moving on, let's stay, of course, in 2015, but let's talk a little bit about our personal goals for the year. So, do you guys have any personal goals, maybe areas you'd like to work on, or things you'd like to learn this year, or different genres you'd like to try out? Nick, let's start with you. Any personal goals for 2015?
By personal goals, you mean as a person, or like just in general, like business-wise? And
In terms of game design and development, are there any new programs you'd like to learn, or conferences you'd like to attend, things of that nature?
I'd love relocate to Seattle and be able to go to PAX every year, or I guess it's not every year, or is it every year in Seattle, or do they push it all over the place? Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, PAX would be really cool to go to. As for learning new stuff, I need to work more on character modeling. I'm pretty good at like more cartoony characters, but I really want to get anatomy down myself. That's something that I need to get better at. Maybe even take like a actual anatomy class, or pick up an anatomy book, because it's one of the hard, if not the hardest thing in the 3D industry for 3D modeling. And probably learn a little bit more of I've been playing with a lot of programs, like I've been gotten pretty good at Modo is my main 3D software, and then Lightwave, but I've been playing around with where is it? I can't even remember the name of the program. I think it was 3D Coat. They have some really cool features in there. And then I've been playing a lot with Mari, so just getting better at overall. I've been working a lot with Unreal Engine for the game I'm working on. I guess that'd be another goal, getting that game completed. I've been learning a lot of blueprinting for Unreal Engine and how to do mobile development, because there's like no one even attempting it in Unreal, because I think it's impossible, yet it's actually pretty possible and not that hard either. So yeah, that's kind of my goals anyway.
Okay. Do you have any scheduled projects that are supposed to come out in 2015?
Hopefully Lamora puzzle game, but just comes down to, we're a small indie team and we all work when we have extra time, so it's all of us trying to make sure that extra time isn't we don't forget about that extra time and actually work on it and get it done and not let the game fall. But I think it'll definitely get somewhere if we can get it out and on the market, because we've already got all the places to put it. Steam's already looked at it. Xbox, Wii's going to be a big issue now that we've switched to Unreal from Unity, though. So I don't see it making it to Wii U because of that. But yeah, overall we have a lot of places for it to go, but we need to get it finished and ready for publicity first. But yeah.
Okay. Evan, what about you? What are some personal goals or areas you'd like to grow in terms of game design and development this year? And also, are there any projects you have coming up?
Yeah, so right now I'm pretty focused on getting deeper into the programming world. I've been doing a lot of online classes and tutorials and that sort of thing. I've kind of want to take ownership of my designs in that way and not be reliant on a programmer if at all possible. As far as projects completed, I'm trying to finish a rather large chunk of my current project, which is called Lumens. It's a platformer. Um, Trying to finish that one, at least a large chunk of it by the end of the year. It's kind of an ambitious project, but it's been really fun to work on. Other than that, I'm still contemplating returning to school briefly to focus on computer science, because I've kind of found that I'm pretty good at it. I'm just, I've never had a formal education for it.
Cool. Yeah, and I guess for me personally, I mean, obviously there's only so much we can talk about this early in the year, but I personally would like to sort of work out the more work-life balance so I can actually spend some more time with i4Games and do more things with EFG. Obviously, we're always trying to grow the site, and we're trying to get our name out there, so we have some ideas. Me and Rai may try and do some content together, and that could be interesting. We also have potentially some other big projects coming up that may involve some crowdfunding, but can't necessarily say exactly what those projects are as of right now. And obviously we have the website, so we want to get both phase 1 complete and phase 2 as well. But that's about it for me. So yeah, I guess. So it seems like the general consensus is that 2015 wasn't necessarily the best year for video games. I think historically speaking, when you go back and you look at some years, some obviously just stand out more than others. I mean, when you have like 1998, for example, is a year that immediately comes to mind as a great year for video games. 2014, I don't think will be remembered as fondly. Seemed like it was a bit of a mixed bag. Lots of stuff delayed. Lots of stuff released that was kind of messy and buggy. But it looks like 2015 could be a pretty interesting year, at least on the AAA front. Obviously, with indie and mobile, it can be, it's anybody's game at this point, since those guys generally don't have their stuff out there quite as early as AAA. Rounding it out here, let's just go around the horn and let everyone know where they can find us at. So, Nick, if people want to follow you online, where are you located?
Pretty much every social media out there. Basically look for EchoSpawn Studios, echospawnstudios.com, and then you've got, Twitter, which is at EchoSpawn, or Facebook, which is EchoSpawn Studios. So pretty much anything with EchoSpawn, you'll find me.
Okay. Evan, what about you? Where can people follow you online?
Well, you guys can follow me at Graphical Evan on Twitter. I'm up on Facebook under Nightlight Interactive, and you can find my personal website, which is evanmcg.com.
Okay, and as always, you can follow i4Games. You can join our LinkedIn group if you just search for i4Games. We also have a YouTube channel, a Twitter account, and a Facebook page as well, so be sure to like us and follow us there. That's where we'll post updates about upcoming projects, including the website and any planned big announcements. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and Thank you everyone for listening. This is your host, Jerry Kline, signing off.